2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire possessed a military machine so massive and disciplined that resisting it was considered mathematical suicide. To fight Rome was to die. But an African general named Hannibal Barca refused the math. Knowing a direct naval assault would fail, Hannibal marched an army of 40,000 men and enormous war elephants directly over the freezing, jagged peaks of the southern European Alps. Rome considered those mountains completely impassable. Hannibal treated them as a side door to Italy's unprotected northern border. That single maneuver allowed an underdog commander, isolated from his own supply lines, to routinely trap and slaughter Roman legions on their own home soil for 16 consecutive years. Hannibal operated by a specific set of principles he called his 99 truths. Central to these was the 51% rule, the observation that most of any conflict is decided by the psychological state of the participants. Modern competitors, from corporate monopolies to entrenched systemic barriers, work the same way. They rely on the weight of their resources to intimidate you into submission before you even step onto the field. When you face a giant, trying to outmuscle them on their terms guarantees failure. Success requires you to abandon standard combat in favor of asymmetric mental warfare. The first rule in Hannibal's playbook requires you to view your opponent's hostility as an energy source rather than a threat. An overwhelming opponent acts as a brutal evolutionary forcing function. If you have a weak spot, a powerful enemy will find it. If you are lazy, they will exploit it. They force you to adapt or die. The existential threat of the Roman military machine is exactly what molded Hannibal into a lethal strategist. Rome's vast resources meant he could never sleep in, skip preparation, or allow his battlefield awareness to dull. His enemy's relentless aggression built his endurance. We see this exact dynamic play out thousands of years later in the boxing ring. Muhammad Ali faced opponents who hit harder and possessed terrifying physical power, yet he consistently dismantled them by weaponizing their own hostility. Ali famously deployed the rope-a-dope boxing strategy, leaning back against the ropes and letting heavyweights exhaust themselves with furious, ineffective punches. But the psychological work started months earlier. By taunting his rivals and manipulating the press, Ali carefully manufactured anger in his opponents, dictating the emotional temperature of the fight before the opening bell even rang. An opponent's aggression is an external energy source. When you strip away your own fear and ego, you can redirect that aggressive momentum to sharpen your focus and force the giant to fight exactly where you want them to. The second rule states that all warfare relies on deception, and the most effective deception requires a deep, calculated patience. Dominant opponents have a severe psychological blind spot. Because they are used to winning, they are conditioned to only process information that confirms their existing belief in their own superiority. They expect you to act like a victim. This tactical map shows how Hannibal exploited that arrogance. Trapped by the Romans, he tied flaming torches to a cattle herd, stampeding them toward a ridge. Seeing the lights, Roman generals rushed there, abandoning the real escape route. The deception fed their expectations perfectly. In the late 18th century, an underdog named Toussaint Louverture faced the seemingly invincible French Empire in Haiti. He applied this same patient deception to dismantle a massive colonial power. He used years of extreme patience to systematically infiltrate their ranks, study their logistics, and reverse engineer their tactical system. By the time he launched his rebellion, he already owned their playbook. Effective deception works by feeding an enemy's ego until their false assumptions lead them into a moment of total vulnerability. But before you can manipulate the external terrain, you have to establish absolute control over your own internal psychological landscape. That is the third rule of the playbook. Hannibal's behavior model rests on 4 mental pillars: love, hate, wants, and needs. The critical vulnerability is confusing a superficial want with a fundamental need. Competitors hunt for this imbalance, dangling artificial wants to bait you into decisions that compromise your entire strategic position. Defending against this requires strict, continuous internal auditing. You have to interrogate your own motivations constantly, ensuring that emotional reactions and manufactured desires never override your long-term goals. You can never exploit an enemy's psychological weaknesses if your own internal desires can be easily baited, bought, or manipulated. After 16 years of unyielding dominance across Italy, Hannibal was ultimately defeated at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. He was beaten by a Roman general named Scipio Africanus. Scipio won because he spent over a decade obsessively studying and adopting Hannibal's exact mental playbook, eventually using the Carthaginians' own tactics against him. Rome eventually erased the Carthaginian Empire from the map, but Hannibal's asymmetric mindset survived. It passed down through history as a highly guarded blueprint for future conquerors and those seeking to dismantle systems of power. These principles transitioned into the modern era, studied by 20th century military leaders like General Colin Powell to navigate the complexities of high-stakes geopolitical conflict. This strategy also served as an inspiration for social disruptors. Figures like Malcolm X explicitly cited Hannibal as a historical grandfather of strategy, whose exploits proved that under-resourced people could successfully resist the most powerful empires on Earth. Hannibal's legacy proves that the environment of your birth, no matter how hostile, is secondary to your strategic intent. As he wrote in Truth 34, "When your endeavor exceeds your environment, you make the very ground fight for you."